there's anybody who brought along your own device, because I remember at the first class meeting, someone asked if it was okay to record me. Now, I have been recording on this, but it's been a little bit unpredictable lately. Last week, the last 11 minutes vanished from the recording. I went back and I found them, but that alarmed me. And then Tuesday of this week, I guest lectured in a colleague's class, and that recording just vanished. So if you've got something to record me with and you want there to be a recording, you are invited to use your own device, because it's good for us to have a backup. We have finally today reached the first of the channels of nonverbal communication. We did the overview. Last week we talked biology and culture. Today we are going to talk about appearance. One of the first things to say about appearance as a channel of nonverbal communication, nonverbal researchers often say nonverbal messages have, and I should have put this on the slides, but never too late, they have primacy. Primacy. Most of the time, not all, but most of the time, we can receive and process a nonverbal message faster, more quickly than we can verbal content. You can often tell by someone's tone of voice whether what they're going to say is good news or bad news. Now, not always. Maybe someone you know very well says something to you that they've said 1,000 times. Maybe they say good morning. Maybe they give you the same joke they always give you. And only later do you notice their tone was different, their face was different. Sometimes that happens. Mostly, though, nonverbals are faster. I mention that here to say appearance is the fastest of all. Appearance, if you think about it, travels at the speed of light. And when you meet someone for the very first time, the impression they make on you by what they look like, those are the first messages they send you. On the day we did the overview of all of nonverbal, and I talked through all of the channels, we said that appearance consisted of endowment, adornment, and modification. And I quickly went through each of those, giving only a few examples. This time, we're going to spend a little more time on what each of these means. Endowment, that refers to things about your appearance that do not change unless you change them and are usually difficult to change. They don't change unless you actively change them, and they're usually difficult to change, or even impossible. The example I gave before was height. There are messages, there are impressions people get based on how tall you are, how short you are. When you're a child, your height changes, but once you're an adult, your height doesn't change anymore. Another example, the color of your eyes. Now, it can be changed temporarily with colored contact lenses. In theory, it could be changed surgically. That seems like a bad idea. A third example of endowment is your frame. The technical term for this, and we are going to get to this today, is your somatotype. Your somatotype. It comes from the shape of your skeleton and also your muscles and distribution of muscle and fat. Basically, the outline of your body. Some people, therefore, are very slender. Some have a rounded shape. Some have a triangular and therefore more athletic shape. And you can put on weight or take off weight, but your shape usually does not change that much, your frame. A fourth example of endowment, the texture that your hair is when it grows out of your head. Now you can change this. You can relax your hair. You can get a perm. But the hair that you have not treated, the hair growing in behind it, will still be whatever it normally is. If you have curly hair, you can relax it, but it'll grow in curly. And a final example of endowment, your skin tone, whether your skin is light or dark. As with hair, you can change it, you could be out in the sun, but what the sun does to it will eventually fade. That's to give you the concept of endowment. There are other things we could identify, but I'm hoping that now makes sense. Second, there is adornment. Adornment refers to things you can put on or take off quickly. And I should add, put on, take off, or display. Carry with you. Because not everything we're about to talk about will be something that you wear, although most of it is. The obvious example is clothing. We're going to have a lot to say today about the kinds of messages we send with clothing and what the research says about them. Included with clothing, because you wear it, are shoes, which can send messages, and hats. Also worn, also something we wear that we don't really have any use for other than ornamenting, jewelry. But then there are things that we carry, and they may have a function. Some women, although fewer than in the past, carry a purse, and the purse is not only functional, but it is meant to, we display it to say things about ourselves. Some things like sunglasses, they have a function, but they're also for display. They add to our attractiveness. They say something about our taste. Good morning. And even your phone case. Phone cases often show what we are a fan of, what we think is attractive, and because they're easy to change, we would classify them with adornment. Then there is makeup. Makeup can be put on and taken off reasonably quickly. And although your hair texture is part of your endowment, your hairstyle is part of your adornment. Finally, of the three, there is modification. Modification, it's not your endowment. It involves usually changing something that is part of your endowment. The difference between adornment and modification is very, very difficult, maybe impossible to undo. Adornment's easy. You put a shirt on, you can take the shirt off, put another shirt on. But if you get a tattoo, and it's not a temporary tattoo, it's possible to remove it. Not easily, and in some cases, not completely. A picture I showed you before with a lot of piercings, and even I'm not sure on this person's teeth, whether those are implants or whether the teeth have been ground down. Those kinds of modifications, typically done for cosmetic purposes, they want to look a certain way. Those are very hard to undo. There's also hair removal. Hair removal is done for appearance and is difficult to undo. There is cosmetic surgery, including double-fold eyelid surgery. And then one example that's not usually voluntarily done for the sake of appearance. Sometimes people, because of accidents or because of health issues, have surgery that alters their appearance, maybe by amputating a limb. Now, you don't do that because you think it looks attractive to wear a prosthetic, but it is true that people who need that surgery, that it does change their appearance. And there is work done in perceptions that people have of someone who's had an amputation and now wears a prosthetic. So we would classify that as modification. So that brings us to the end of the three categories, endowment, adornment, and modification, and brings us then, what do we do? What messages do we send? What categories could we put them in? And we will divide this into 5 categories. 5 categories. So the first of the 5, the looking glass self. Looking glass is a very old-fashioned word for a mirror. There was a philosopher named George Herbert Mead. What he gave the world was a theory called symbolic interactionism. And the idea right down at the heart of it is, every one of us, we have certain ideas. Each of you have certain ideas about who you individually are. Who am I? I'm a college professor. I'm a Christian. I like to cook. I'm a runner. I've run like 7 half marathons. All those are things that I think about me. You have things you think about you. Some of the things you think about you are based on how other people treat you. You might know that among your friend group that you're the fun one, or that you are the peacemaker, or that you are the problem solver. Maybe in your family, you're the smart one, and they all put pressure on you to do well in school. Symbolic interactionism, the idea behind the entire theoretical framework. We have a layer to our identity that comes from how other people treat us. There's a 1-sentence summary of that theory. I have no idea if it's going to translate, but I'm going to give it to you. Someone who believes in the looking glass self and is applying symbolic interactionism theory would agree with this. I am not who I am. I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. Back at my home campus in the United States, I have a number of fellow professors who have raised children. They are parents. They're moms and dads. They are very patient, very warm, very kind with their students. And I think my students get fond of me, and I think they respect me, but they would tell you that I am a little bit scary. Now, what I did right there, they think I'm scary. I therefore know that as a professor, a thing that is true of me, they think I'm scary. And there are things I do because I know I have that effect on them. That is the looking glass self. Things you know about you based on how other people treat you. One good way to bring it into focus. What kinds of behaviors would you not even try because the people around you would not take you seriously if you did? The people around you would say, "This is not you. Why are you doing this?" Those kinds of behaviors will reveal to you your looking glass self. Now, I bring this up in connection with appearance. Because very often, we dress and we groom based on what other people expect. And much of what we're going to say about the looking glass self is about you making more clear to yourself who you are. It's a big issue in the study of communication that we will commonly feel a little unsure of what makes up our identity. Maybe you are the fun one in your friend group, but maybe you feel anxious about, what if my friends aren't having fun? Maybe you are the smart one, but maybe you feel scared that this term you're not going to get good grades. So we manage our identity. And every day when we get our appearance ready to walk out the door and take on the world, your choice of clothing, your choice of grooming has a lot to do with, I want to reinforce what other people are allowing me to be. Now, there are two specific wrinkles. Yeah, actually, I had a couple more examples I was going to throw out before I get to the wrinkles. I have known people, and maybe you know people, who have very, very fashionable taste, and they're always getting compliments from other people when they wear something that looks really good on them. Not a shirt that has skulls all over it that I'm wearing because Monday is Halloween. But if you're that person and you have really good taste in fashion, every time you get one of those compliments, it reinforces your sense of what makes you, you. If you're an athlete, you may dress in such a way, you wear sports-appropriate clothing more often. You wear jerseys that show the name of your favorite athlete. Every time you reinforce in other people's minds you're tied to your sport, you feel a little bit more like you. So a couple of wrinkles that show up in research into how we use appearance to communicate non-verbally. One of them is uniqueness theory. Uniqueness theory is the work of Charles Snyder at the University of Kansas and Howard Fromkin at York University in Canada. And what it says, people have a negative emotional response to any kind of feedback that tells them they are exactly the same as everybody else. It doesn't feel good to have other people think you're a carbon copy, you're an exact duplicate of everybody else. But people also respond negatively to feedback that tells them they're completely different from everybody else. Where you want to be is in that sweet spot where you're wearing the school uniform, but your backpack is a different color. Or you're the one not wearing tights. Or you have glasses and nobody else does. Or you're the one whose hair is not pulled back. Little touches that tell the world, I fit in, I'm not bizarrely different. As I'm wearing this shirt and someone walks in and the first thing they hear is, I'm not bizarrely different. But being in the middle, a little individuating difference. This especially shows up in clothing and in grooming. The other place it shows up is in tattoos. People who have tattoos are very, very likely to have a high need for uniqueness. Snyder and Fromkin's work on uniqueness theory, they have developed a standard instrument, a questionnaire you can fill out that measures your need for uniqueness. And it's very common that people who get tattoos score very high. The other wrinkle that I wanted to call your attention to, that explains in part the looking glass self, is enclosed cognition, enclothed cognition. Now that's a highly technical term, so let me break it down and make it simpler. The clothes that we put on, to a surprisingly powerful degree, they give us a cue, they tip us in how we think, in how our brains operate. We will think differently depending on the clothes that we have on. A 2012 study by a researcher named Adam Galinsky involved a test that I'm going to have to explain. This is a Stroop test. A Stroop test measures your ability to focus and concentrate without getting distracted. If you wanted to take the Stroop test on this screen right now, the challenge is read the color, don't read the word. So if you tried to read red, blue, yellow, green, purple, black, you just flunked the Stroop test. To do it properly, you have to look at it and say black, yellow, purple, red, green, blue. And you have to concentrate or you'll stumble and say the word. If you later on want to give it a try, in the slides that are online, I put it up in Japanese, so you can take a stab at it. Here is what Galinsky did in his study. He had participants put on a white coat, and he then had them take a Stroop test. But for half of the participants chosen at random, he told them that the white coat was a doctor's white coat. And for the other half chosen at random, he told them the white coat was something painters wear to keep their clothes clean. The half that were told that it was a doctor's white coat did the Stroop test much faster. Put on a coat that tells you you're a smart person like a doctor, and you concentrate because the clothing gives you the cue. But if you're told that the coat is to do a task that doesn't take a lot of thinking, and you don't experience the effect. A lot of athletes will report when they put on their uniform, they identify more with the team. Putting on the uniform tells them they're part of a team. It changes how they think. A lot of actors very carefully choose the costume they will wear because every time they put that costume on, it's like putting on the character. So we know in certain situations, the clothing that you wear gives you a message about how you're supposed to be thinking. Because I, through middle school, high school, college, and beyond, was involved in debate, I was on the debate team, nearly all my friends from my young adult years are lawyers, and quite a few of them are judges. And every time they go to sit on the bench and do their job, they put on their judge robe. And they have told me, we've had conversations about they put that robe on and they are a different person. And at the end of the day, they take the robe off, they leave it at the office, and they think differently. So, our appearance, one of the things it does, is it tells us who we are. Now, where does this fit into communication? Because you might be thinking, okay, clarifying my understanding of who I am, that sounds like psychology. But self-concept, your understanding of who you are, is a huge issue in communication. I'll give you just 3 examples of why. First of all, you communicate completely differently when you feel insecure. When you feel insecure, you're a lot more likely to be defensive. You're a lot more likely to take someone's comment negatively. When you feel secure and something doesn't go your way, it's easier to just let it go, not be bothered by it. Secondly, there are a lot of communication situations where you need, if you want to succeed, you need to be assertive. And it's very difficult to be assertive if you feel as though your identity is unstable, if you're not sure, actually, that you are who you think you are. And a third application from communication research that I wish we could spend more than about 60 seconds on. This one just occurred to me this morning, which is why it's not on the slide. Self-expansion theory. I teach a class on communication in romantic relationships, and we talked for quite a while about self-expansion theory. Some people get married and stay married. Some people enter into dating relationships and stay together, and others don't. And right now, one of the dominant theoretical explanations for who stays together and who does not is self-expansion theory. When you pick a partner who, in the things that they do, the things that they like, the things that they pursue, they not only make you feel more like yourself, but they enlarge your sense of yourself. Those are the relationships where people stay together. Relationships where people cheat, where they are unfaithful, very often it's because they and their partner are no longer enlarging one another's sense of self. Is it maybe a stretch to tie this to nonverbal communication? I would say throughout your life, you are working on yourself. It's a work in progress. And you've got parts of your life where you feel like it's stronger, and parts of your life where you feel like it's undermined. You might have seen it already with your grandparents. Someday soon it may happen with your parents. They reach the end of their life where they can't pursue their career anymore, and their sense of self will not be as strong as it was before. So we do a lot of the work of managing the self we show the world by managing our appearance. And that feeds into a lot of big issues in communication. That's the first thing we can say about appearance. Here's the second. By observing other people's appearance, we decide what to expect. We decide what to expect from them. Expectancies are baseline beginner knowledge. Baseline beginner knowledge. Let us say your very best friend has just walked into the room, but you haven't had time to talk with them yet. From their appearance, you can see a lot about how you think the conversation will go. You can see whether they seem tired or rested, in a good mood, in a bad mood, dressed to work, dressed to play. You could size all that up at a glance. And sometimes you might be mistaken. Your first impression, you might think they look tired. And you might say, "Are you tired?" And they might say, "No." So expectancies, what you observe about someone when you set your expectancy, it's not always 100% accurate. That's the concept. It's the starter knowledge. Let's look at some specific examples. First of all, we use appearance just to figure out who people are. And my example is identical twins. I've known a bunch of identical twins over the years, and you're not quite sure which one you're talking to sometimes. And you might have had, maybe you work with one of the twins, or are a good friend of one of the twins, and then you're talking to the other twin. That's a little bit far-fetched as an example, but there have been a number of studies done recently that have established a surprisingly big segment of the population has a medical condition called face blindness. Face blindness. And they have a very difficult time telling people apart who look relatively similar. I encountered this a few years ago. I had an older student who was a communication major. He was about my age. And a number of years ago, he had a stroke. He had a large blood vessel burst in his brain and nearly died. He recovered and was able to come back to college, but because of that stroke, he had severe face blindness and often couldn't tell who he was talking to. I could also point out, since 2020, we've all been covering about 2/3 of our faces, and it can be very difficult to tell who it is you're talking to if you're talking to people you don't know that well, who resemble someone else, maybe that you do know well. So from appearances, the most basic expectancy that we are able to establish is that you know who it is you're talking to. A second expectancy, you figure out how old people are. From observing someone you're interacting with, if you can see that they're very young, that might tell you that you need to be patient. That if they misbehave, you might need to let it go. That if they have extreme emotions, if they get scared of things, if they get upset about things, well, they're children. Be patient. You also might be able to see from their appearance that they're a little older. And everything I just said might be equally true. You need to be patient. They're a little frail. They sometimes have emotional swings. You also can tell from appearance how physically fit people are. Physical fitness might set your expectancy about what kind of activity it's okay to do with other people. When I first set foot on this campus about 4 weeks ago, and I was being given a tour, several people who were walking me around asked me if we needed to take the elevator or if the stairs were okay. I must look like I'm in really bad shape or something. But when you see how fit people are, that's one expectancy. Another, you can often see how healthy people are. And if it looks like their health is compromised, then you might have to change how you interact with them. In line with those two, you often can see whether people have a disability. Now, I've been talking about expectancies, and I mentioned early on that we are sometimes wrong. So have a look at this man, and I bet you can tell what particular disability he has. And I want you to think for a second whether he commonly rides a bicycle. And then I want you to think whether he commonly plays basketball. And then I want to show you Daniel Kish. Those two eyes are both glass. He has no eyeballs. When he was not quite a year old, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And in removing the brain tumor, they had to remove his eyeballs. He wears the glass eyes so he doesn't disturb people. His nickname is Bat Boy because as he travels around, he clicks. And he has trained himself, he can hear by how the clicks echo back. He can hear if he's approaching things. From the time he was a child, he would go out and play on his own, and his parents let him. They put him sometimes in schools that had programs for people with disabilities, and the teachers would want to escort him from classroom to classroom, holding his hand. And he would say, "No, I can find the room." And his parents had to go argue with the teachers. he teaches other people to do it as well. One person he taught was a young man named Ben Underwood, also blind, plays basketball. You can find videos about both of them on YouTube. Ben, sadly, lost his eyesight to his own brain tumor, and it came back, and I think shortly before his 16th birthday, he died. But in the years he was alive, very independent despite being blind. Now, when you see that someone is blind, you have expectancies, but sometimes those expectancies are wrong. And there is a fairly detailed theory in the study of nonverbal communication called expectancy violation. Expectancy violation. Now, we're not going to go into it today because disability is not the best example to explain it. We will talk at length about expectancy violation later when we talk about movement and personal space. But on that day, I want you to remember some of the things we said about expectancy because they will lay the foundation for your understanding of that theory. We also tend to develop expectancies about someone's personality. Now, this is research that was all done in the West, in the United States, some of it in Europe. But from looking at someone, you remember about 15, 20 minutes ago when I said the shape of your body, you could be slender or round or triangular. Those are called somatotypes. And I'm seeing that I didn't put that word on the slide, and I'm getting annoyed with myself. Somatotype. Somato just means body. So somatotype just means body type. There are three. There is the ectomorph. Marathon runners tend to be ectomorphs. Very, very thin. Second somatotype is the mesomorph. Mesomorphs tend to have an athletic build. Commonly, men especially, their upper torso is an upside-down triangle. Broad shoulders, slimmer waist. And third, there is the endomorph. Endomorphs have a round shape. And what research tells us, a whole lot of research over decades, although admittedly done in the United States and some in Europe. If the only thing you know about someone is their build, their frame, we tend to expect ectomorphs to be socially awkward, anxious, high-strung. We expect them to be kind of nerds. We expect people who are mesomorphs to be very athletic, very confident. We expect them to have a hot temper, very competitive. And then for endomorphs, we expect them to be warm and friendly, a little bit lazy. The shorthand for it, it's not a nice thing to say, but it shows up a lot in the research. Fat people are jolly. Now, I want to make sure you understand me. Nobody is saying, if this is your body shape, that's what your personality will be. No. There are thin people who are very competitive and thin people who are very warm and friendly. There are athletically shaped people who are socially awkward. There are athletically shaped people who are a little bit lazy. And there are people with a round shape who have traits of both those personalities. But when you see somebody else, and the only thing you see is their frame, you haven't talked to them yet, you haven't learned anything about them, a basic assumption we will snap to is we will look at this, we will assume things about their level of activity, and we will expect that they have a certain kind of personality. A few other things that we use to develop our expectancies. Oh heavens, I almost skipped something that would have been important. This is also about personality. The baby face overgeneralization effect. The baby face overgeneralization effect. This is Marina Nagasawa. She used to be in a girl group. She's now an actress and a model. When that picture was taken, she was, I think, 26. She has one of the best examples I could find of a baby face. Large eyes. I don't guess her nose, relatively speaking, is that small, but small nose is part of the baby face effect. Round face, small chin, pouting lips, childlike face. We tend to, in much the same way, we look at someone's frame and we make assumptions. Athletic build, we expect competitive, and so forth. We look at people's faces when they look very babyish, and we expect a babyish personality. And we may be surprised if they actually are very even-tempered and mature. And the same is true the other way. Some people have faces where their features look very mature. And when that's the first information we have, and we have not interacted, we will assume that that tells us their personality. All right. A few other things we use to set expectancy by looking at people. In the United States, in much of the world, and probably to an extent all parts of the world, you see racial difference. And those expectancies very often turn out to be inaccurate. But if the only information you have are the visible traits that tell you how someone might be racially categorized, we set expectations. Similarly, clothing that people wear, makeup that people wear, tell us about their ethnicity, what ethnic group they're part of. And you might be able to tell, by looking at these two gentlemen, something that would set your expectancy. There's a long conversation we could have about nonverbal communication into a phenomenon that in English we call gaydar. Gaydar has a lot to do with how people move, with their eye behavior, but some of it comes from appearance and grooming. You can tell from the way people dress, and we tend to set our expectations. You can tell they belong to a specific religious community, or another religious community, or still another religious community. And for any of those three, if that's the information you have, you'll use it to set what you expect when you interact with them. She's a nun? Well, this will probably be true. She's Muslim? Well, this will probably be true. And finally, you might, from the uniform someone wears, know something about the work that they do, and set your expectations based on that. All right. So a lot of things we can observe, we use to decide what to expect. Today I just gave you a lot of examples. We will get to what happens, how people react when their expectations are violated. But that's one for the future. Third thing, big issue, attractiveness. This is probably the most fundamental issue when it comes to messages that we send with our appearance. A 1998 study done by Alan Slater at the University of Exeter with babies who were 14 hours old, not even a full day old. They were given different faces to look at. And eye tracking technology was used to measure how long did they look at each face. And the faces that an independent panel of adults agreed were the most attractive, the babies looked at the longest. Babies really like faces that are symmetrical, the same on both sides. They really like faces that have feminine shape. They also really like faces that are not average. So they don't perfectly follow the parameters of what tends to be attractive. All right. In talking about attraction, this is what we'll talk about. What elements make you attractive? What are the perceptual effects of attractiveness? What effect is there in places like classrooms and workplaces? And what effect do things you put on have on your attractiveness? The elements that tend to make people attractive. Symmetry, averageness, and we looked at that last week when I showed you the composite pictures. Maturity and neoteny, which I will translate when we get there. Waist to hip ratio. And finally, scarcity. When it comes to symmetry, having one side of your face be very similar to the other side is one pretty reliable measure of attractiveness. This is Nana Komatsu. I do not remember what she does for a living. I think she's an actress. This is Kento Yamazaki, who also has a very symmetrical face. Now, perfect symmetry is not attractive. And that, over the past year or two, got passed around on a lot of social media channels. People were taking pictures of celebrities and making a perfectly symmetrical face, and it was creepy. Almost anything that is mathematically perfect becomes a little too much like a cartoon. But if your face is lopsided, if the two sides don't match, and if you look around, a lot of the people in your life have slightly lopsided faces, that makes people less attractive. And this is a measure that tends to hold up everywhere around the world. People with symmetrical faces, mostly symmetrical, tend to be more attractive. The one we looked at last time, averageness. The website, by the way, actually, I will do this. Let me, not that. Boom, boom. Face, no. faceresearch.org. faceresearch.org. Here, you can go here to Averager. And I'm just going to do one real quick demonstration. I am going to pick some faces from the ones available that are just a little bit goofy looking, that are not going to knock you over with how beautiful they are. And I'm going to leave each one up for just a second so you can see. These are not exactly beauty contest winners. 4. Let's see. There's one. 5. 6. 7. 8. And 9. And 10. You saw those 10 faces. Let's make a composite of them. That's a lot better looking than any of those 10 faces. And one thing you could do, you can go play with this yourself. faceresearch.org. You can do the same thing. Pick 10 female faces, each of which looks a little unique, and then do the composite, and the composite will be strikingly good looking. And if you want to make really pretty, take all the faces and make a composite of all of them. And you may want to compose some love poetry to how beautiful that person will be. Okay, back we go. These, by the way, are composites from a whole lot of faces of Japanese people put together. And those are some strikingly pretty people who have never existed. Third element, after symmetry, neoteny and maturity. Now, neoteny just means you have features that make you look like a baby. Puppies are neotenous dogs. Kittens are neotenous cats. And there are features that make it obvious that you are very young. And we tend to find the effect that those features have on people, the aww, that factors in to what we find attractive. All around the world, the proper combination of baby-like features with very mature features. It typically is not a good thing for you to be an adult and look like a baby. But if you have large eyes, fairly small nose, but maybe along with it, high cheekbones, a defined jawline, if you're male, some facial hair, combining some of the baby features with some of the mature features, that's very consistently a measure of attractiveness. Now, which ones you're supposed to have tends to be culture specific. There are some parts of the world where a big, prominent nose is very attractive, and others where it's the ugliest face you can have. Then there is, and this is for women, waist to hip ratio. Waist to hip ratio. I'm going to show you, I don't know how easy they're going to be to see. I'm just going to show you some outlines. That outline, that one, that one, that one. We're going to call them 1, 2, 3, and 4. In each of the pictures in each column, the waist to hip ratio is the same. And I want you just in your mind, if this is 1, 2, 3, and 4, pick which one do you think consistently around the world is the most attractive build. I'll give you a second to make up your mind. And I'll show you what the ratios are. That's 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and 1. So 0.8 waist to hips ratio. If your hips were, say, 40 inches, your waist would be 32. 0.7, if your waist was 40 inches, or your hips were 40 inches, your waist would be 28. And the one that consistently is the most attractive is 0.7. So if this is the shape that you've got, how heavy you actually are, what dress size you actually wear, is less important than how your waist compares to your hips. Now, a few years ago, The Guardian, an English newspaper, went out and found women in several different dress sizes who had a 0.7 waist to hip ratio. And they printed this picture. All of them have a 0.7 waist to hip ratio. Last week when we talked about the biological roots of nonverbals, we said sometimes what it turns out we find attractive or we act on helps people make healthy babies. And a woman who's got a 0.7 ratio between her waist and her hips, there may be other health issues, but she is in some ways built to where pregnancy is less likely to badly sicken or kill her. Less likely. Final thing we can say about the elements of attractiveness is the principle of scarcity. The other things we've talked about, averageness, symmetry, waist to hip ratio, are pretty uniform around the world. This is a way to think about the ones that are specific, the ones that are local, because there are a lot of beauty standards that are local. Anecdotally, I have heard that in Japan, it's attractive if people have a smaller face. I've heard that it's attractive if you don't have freckles. In the United States, freckles are attractive. I've heard it's more attractive here if women have lighter skin. In the United States, as a matter of fact, that's going to be one of my visuals in a moment, so let me get on with it. One thing in the United States, models tend to be very, very thin. This is Kaya Gerber. She's the daughter of Cindy Crawford, who is a very famous model. And Kaya Gerber's very thin. So thin that it's probably not healthy. The principle of scarcity says commonly in different parts of the world what is attractive is what you don't find very often. And in the United States, this is not the norm for female bodies. This is a little bit closer. Now, if you were to compare that in Africa to Mauritania, and Mauritania is one of the most food insecure nations on earth. They are badly in the grip of a food crisis. They've got widespread famine, and they have had it for a long time. And it is a tradition that the most attractive you can make a bride, the thing you can do to make a woman very desirable to marry is to feed her. And so therefore, mothers force feed their daughters. Because a man who is looking for a wife wants to be able to show the community that he's a good enough provider that he's got a fat wife. Now, I'm not in favor of this. I find this fairly appalling, so I don't want you to get the wrong idea. The principle here, though, in Mauritania, people who are actually have this much food available, that's uncommon. And that's a reason that it makes people attractive. The example I was about to give, in Japan, it's more attractive if you don't let your skin get dark, I'm told. In the United States, letting the sun make your skin dark makes you more attractive. Because a whole lot of people in the United States, if they don't change their skin tone, it's pretty fair, it's pretty light. So changing it conforms with the principle of scarcity. You stand out from the crowd. So that brings us to the end of the elements. Symmetry, averageness, maturity, neoteny, waist-hip ratio, and scarcity. And that brings us on to, if you are attractive, what does that change about how people perceive you? There are three perceptual effects. The halo effect, the what is beautiful is conceited effect, and the what is beautiful is promiscuous, and I'll define that too, effect. The halo effect. The halo effect is stronger in childhood than it is with adults, but adults still have it. When we don't know anything else, we commonly assume that someone who is attractive is more intelligent. We will assume that someone who is attractive is more likable. Beyond the halo effect, there is the what is beautiful is conceited effect. People will, in experimental setups, perceive someone who's very attractive as a snob, very vain, very materialistic, wants money, wants possessions. When people post a lot of selfies on social media, the perception of them tends to be that they are narcissistic, that they are addicted to being praised. Now, as I said before with body types, nobody is saying that attractive people are self-centered. Nobody's saying that. But observers will expect them to be self-centered. As a matter of fact, people who measure high in narcissism, who really are addicted to being praised, they are more likely to be attractive. They are more likely, if pictures of them are evaluated by participants in a study, those participants will assign them a high score. But the cause-effect relationship is in the other direction. People who are narcissistic and addicted to being praised, they put hours into their appearance. But just because someone is attractive does not mean that they're narcissistic. It does not go the other direction. Finally, there is what is beautiful is promiscuous. A better word than promiscuous might be unfaithful, and a simpler word might be we sometimes assume someone who is strikingly attractive has multiple sexual partners and moves from sexual partner to sexual partner effortlessly. Now again, we assume that. People who are polled, people who under experimental circumstances are shown a picture of an attractive person and asked, do you think all these things are true? Do you think this person is intelligent? Yes. Do you think they're friendly? Yes. Do you think they're probably self-centered? Yes. Estimate how many sexual partners do you think they have? 20. These are things that we expect. Bringing us then to some of the effects of attractiveness in non-intimate settings, in classrooms and in workplaces. There's a huge body of research that tells us teachers notice when a student is attractive. As far down as 6, 7, 8-year-olds, teachers will call on attractive students more often and give attractive students more encouragement. In the workplace, supervisors, if they have an attractive employee who makes a mistake, they'll assume the mistake was beyond the employee's control. But if they have an unattractive employee who makes a mistake, they're more likely to say it was because of that employee's character or personality. And attractive people, everything else being equal, tend to get paid more. Two people doing the same job, one markedly more attractive than the other, they'll probably have a higher rate of pay. Attractiveness comes up in job interviews. And it is an advantage, but there are some limitations to that finding. Attractiveness helps you in a job interview more if the job you're interviewing for requires social skills or if you're going to face the public. If you're just going to sit in a back room and do the accounting, attractiveness will not help you get the job. It's also true, female interviewers are more likely to have a beauty bias and take applicants for jobs who otherwise are equal and prefer the more attractive one than male interviewers are. Finally, if there are multiple male applicants for a job, the more attractive one will have an advantage no matter what. But if there are multiple female applicants for a job, attractiveness is an advantage only if it's a low-level job. If it's for management, if it's for leadership, attractiveness can actually be a disadvantage, and a moderately attractive female applicant may have an advantage. Bringing us then to the uses of adornment. Use of makeup to enhance attractiveness, piercings and tattoos, and clothing. A couple of things to say about each of those. The use of makeup. Makeup creates the appearance of health. You put makeup on and suddenly you have clear skin. You have flushed cheeks. You draw attention to your eyes. And it changes other people's behavior. Again, this research was mostly done in the West, but men are more likely to stop and pick up a woman who's holding out her thumb wanting a ride, something we call hitchhiking, if the woman is wearing makeup. And if a woman is waiting tables in a restaurant and chooses not to wear makeup one day, this again is a practice in the United States that's not a practice here, I gather. But in the United States, you go to a restaurant, and at the end of your visit to the restaurant, you leave money. You tip the server based on how good the service was. Women who wait tables, the days they don't wear makeup, lower tips. And if they do wear makeup, higher tips. Now, there are some backfire effects. Surprisingly often, if a woman is wearing a natural look to where the makeup is very understated, barely noticeable, that gets rated more attractive. And if women can see that a woman has obvious makeup on, that you can't help but notice, women participating in studies shown pictures like that will say that that woman probably is unfaithful and has multiple sexual partners. So there are some negative evaluations that can come from being, obvious with use of makeup to try to be more attractive. A couple of things we know about tattoos and piercings. We know they're different according to the gender of the person wearing them. Women who get a tattoo are a lot more likely to get a subtle tattoo like that one. Men are more likely to cover an entire arm, to get a sleeve, to have a tattoo that's in an obvious place that can't be missed. Now, nobody's saying that this always happens, but it is a tendency, and a pretty pronounced tendency. Research in the United States found over 80% of hiring managers are less likely to hire an applicant who has a tattoo, even if the manager has a tattoo. And one interesting thing, when young adults experience negative treatment because they have a tattoo, the friend group tends to experience a feeling of intense closeness. That the boss, the old person who doesn't like the tattoo, just doesn't understand. I should have mentioned previously, in the United States, you're a lot more likely to have a tattoo if your friends have a tattoo. It's very much a friend circle thing. Bringing us then to clothing. And there are two things we can say, briefly, that come out of the research about using clothing to try to be attractive. One line of research divided clothing strategies to be attractive into two categories. One, try to dress to show status. Try to dress to show that you can afford expensive clothing and that you have the taste to know the difference. The other strategy was to dress to show the shape of your body, which could mean exposing more of your body. It could mean wearing things that were more form-fitting. And participants in the study were shown pictures of women with both strategies as far as clothing. And the women who had dressed to show status, the participants in the study said that they would be someone who was good to marry. But if they had chosen clothing to show off their physique, then that display made them attractive and made sex with that person seem like a good idea, but not the same evaluation as far as marriage quality. And then finally, a study of clothing choices women make for the workplace found moderately conservative clothing was a really, really good idea. Moderately conservative. Because if women wore extremely conservative clothing, the people around them would evaluate them as unapproachable and not creative. But the women whose clothing choices their colleagues agreed were moderately conservative, they reported they had higher job satisfaction and career success. All right. Into the home stretch. We are done with attractiveness. That was the biggest part. We will talk a little about belonging and a little about respect. We tend to choose clothes. We tend to choose to be around people who look similar to us. And we adorn, we pick clothing, and we groom to try to be similar. If you've ever gone shopping for clothes and you've noticed something that you thought would fit you and you could afford, and it was also trendy, it's what everybody's wearing. That drive is the drive for belonging. And you might be thinking, well, didn't you say before we have a need for uniqueness? What we do about that, we tend to pick clothes that fit into the category but have some variation. So if you belong to a law firm and you're expected to show up in a suit, there are varieties of suit you can wear. A little bit brownish, a little bit bluish. There are tasteful neckties you could wear to court, but your necktie could be a different color. There's a clothing company in the United States launched in the 1990s called FUBU. For Us, By Us. It was founded by a black fashion designer, and all the major employees, all the leadership, they were all black as well. It was marketed to black people in the United States. This is a black-owned company. You're supporting your community if you buy and wear the clothing. And there are a fair number of black African-American people in the United States who wear FUBU clothing, but they will still tend to their need for uniqueness by wearing different FUBU clothing. Fits within the category, fits within the style, and they get to belong, but they don't necessarily look the same as everybody else. Beyond that, the clothes you wear could show you're part of an organization, or they can show that you are affiliated with the organization and you have something in common with other people who are affiliated with the organization. Your clothing, fairly obviously, can show that you admire a particular team or that you admire a particular music group. And it's not just clothing, it's also makeup. Your appearance could show what your favorite anime is. You also might wear clothing prescribed for you by others because it encourages what we call, and it's a French expression, esprit de corps, spirit of the group. Not only do sports teams do this, military organizations do it, and as we mentioned before, schools do it. The argument for school uniforms, there are several arguments. One is that to a certain degree it erases the difference in income between households, because if everyone wears basically the same thing, it's harder to tell who has more money and who has less. Another argument is there are fewer distractions. You don't pay as much attention to who's wearing what. But basically, if everyone's dressed the same way, there's a subtle nonverbal cue that you're all part of a group. And we know that in learning environments, it's very helpful if people feel cooperative and feel like they all have a stake in one another's success. I have gathered in reading about Japan that school uniforms are pretty commonly debated. I can tell you in the United States, only private schools have school uniforms. In public schools, you could never require school uniforms. They never pass free speech law. Final message we send with our clothing, messages about respect. And this falls into two categories. We dress to give respect, and we dress to signal to other people that we expect them to give us respect. If you were invited to someone's wedding, I would hope you would not show up in cut-off shorts and Crocs. If you did, that would signal to them that their special day was not that special to you. I would assume when you take your romantic partner home to meet your parents, that you dress in a way, or they dress in a way that shows your parents that they are respectable. And an example we used earlier. When you go in to interview for a job, you give some serious thought to how you dress. And boy, will it be scrutinized. I have been on job interview committees, and we do notice what people wear and whether it's been, is it clean, is it pressed, does it fit them? But on the message of respect, sometimes the message that's being sent is, I expect you to show me respect. So the ribbons and the stars that show his rank, that uniform shows that that's a commanding officer. And when you read the uniform and see the authority they have, that's your cue that you're to give it. This, by the way, is General Yamazaki, Chief of Staff of the Self-Defense Force. And then here we have Cardinal Thomas Maeda of Osaka, along with Archbishop Joseph Takami of Nagasaki and Archbishop Tarcisius Kikuchi of Tokyo, meeting with the Pope. The red hat shows which is a cardinal and not an archbishop, and therefore higher up in the Catholic Church. And the Pope is wearing all white, and the clothing shows that he's the highest of all and is to be shown the most respect. Now, it's not the case that if you want to show other people that you want to be respected, that you just dress conservatively. Here we have Ion, a Japanese thrash metal band. And they dress that way because if they showed up to play thrash metal, dressed like lawyers, imagine how they'd get made fun of. In particular types of music, you're expected to dress according to what that subculture dictates. So this way of dressing and grooming, styling their hair, wearing makeup, the accessories, all of it shows we belong here, we understand metal culture, and we expect to be taken seriously. Historically, the way people showed that they were high in status and wanted to be shown respect was they dressed very expensively. In Europe and also in Japan, there were what we call sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws. And those told you what kind of clothing it was legal to wear. And if you were lower in income or status, it was illegal to wear certain expensive kinds of clothing. It wasn't just that you couldn't afford them, it was that you could be punished. The trend more recently is if you are very wealthy, you signal it, and you signal that you deserve respect by dressing down and dressing very casually. This is Tadashi Yanai, CEO of Uniqlo, and currently the wealthiest man in Japan. And he is not dressed like the emperor. So bringing it back, we manage our appearance to tell ourselves who we are, to figure out what to expect from other people, to try to be attractive, and to manage the perceptions that come with attraction, to try to fit in, and try to give respect, and also draw respect, signal other people when we expect to be treated with respect. Those are the major messages and the way they're conveyed when it comes to the nonverbal channel of appearance. We have about 10 minutes. So if you've got questions, I know I blew through it and didn't pause for questions. If you've been sitting on a question you wanted to ask, we've got a good amount of time for one. Please.
What are other traits of attractiveness other than a symmetrical face?
Okay. The question, because it may have been hard to hear. The question was, what are other traits of attractiveness other than symmetrical face? Symmetrical face, average face composites, the right combination of mature and young features, those are the ones where anywhere you go in the world, people will say you're attractive based on that. A lot of the other traits that make you attractive are very, very specific. So we talked about 0.7 waist to hip ratio. Again, anecdotally, this is not anything I've read data collected on, but in Japan, it's less attractive, I'm told, to have a curvy figure, and it's more attractive to have a very slender figure. And even the question of what do we mean by attractive? We mentioned before in talking about clothing, high status clothing means you're good to get married to. Clothing that shows off the shape of your body means you're sexually attractive, and those are distinct. We could also say, I showed you a picture of a model in the United States who was very, very thin. But in the United States, people with a curvy figure, they're the kind of person you might want to date. So, the answer that I'm kind of building to your question, there are a few things that anywhere you go are pretty reliable measures, but everything else is local to the culture. So what you've seen here, or what you've seen in the culture that you came out of, as you were raised from a baby to adulthood, enculturation, you learned what the beauty standards were locally. There's actually not that much that's really universal, which is why we just had the 3 or 4 standards. You're welcome. What other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I think quite personal, but since you're teaching this subject,
Sure.
you become more sensitive with these categories.
That's good. I'll tell you the one. Okay, in case everybody didn't hear the question, because you teach this, are you more sensitive to these categories? I've been aware of, for a long time, of the research pertaining to how teachers treat students. And so I have a few times sat down with myself because occasionally I'll have a student in my class who is so attractive that it's distracting. Now, when I was new to this, when I was in my 20s, and I was maybe 23 and they were 22, then it was only the fact that my bosses threatened me, we will fire you if you date your students. That was the only thing that kept me in line. Now, I'm 53. A 19-year-old looks to me like a child. No offense. You're just at a different place in life. But I do sometimes have students who are so beautiful that my eye will keep going back toward them, and I have to stop and say, teachers do this, and I do not choose to be that kind of teacher. And so, I will correct a little bit, try to give less attention to the distractingly attractive student, and try to make sure I'm being fair to everybody. That's probably where this research has shown up the most. Because what's really important to me, everybody came here to learn, and everybody deserves a fair crack at it, not just whoever happens to be good looking. But the data are very clear. Teachers do get lured in by that. Now, that may not have been the part you were asking about. Oh, it was? Okay, cool. Anyone else have a question? Two things I want to do as we wrap up. One of them, in an email that I had this morning from a colleague here, they mentioned that next week is a holiday. So I'm not going to see you next week. Which is funny because I didn't know that until this morning. I would have shown up and I would have wondered where all you were. Okay, we will pick it up then the week after next, and the category then will be communicating with movement and gesture. And the thing, when I don't get spacey and absent-minded and forget, that I end class with, one of these days I'll have it memorized, but not yet. We're getting there. Shuga anata o shukufukushi anata o mamororemasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni terashi anata o megamarimasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni muke anata ni heian o adairaremasu yoni. Have a really good holiday and have a really enjoyable Halloween, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Go away. Okay.